Tuesday at 10 on WTTW. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
This is our great-grandfather who had a dream in 1945 to open a family business in his name. This is our grandfather who expanded on that dream, bringing custom furniture to Chicago. This is our father and his brothers who grew that dream into the 10 showrooms here today. This is us, 4 sisters who want to make the generations before us proud while making Chicago homes beautiful. Since 1945, this is Smith.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by the generous support of Sylvia C. and Arthur Heim and family.
Everybody in Ireland knows about the Chicago St. Patrick's Day Parade.
It's a real way to bring the community together, and we need that so much today.
I think it really helps us define the pride that we have in the city.
The tradition will go on. We will march again next year, 2022.
This is the city. This is Chicago. This is the best place in the world to live.
Wednesday at 8 on WTTW.
1 year ago, a global pandemic shut down the state, resulting in economic instability, seismic changes to our everyday lives, and uncertainty about the future. We now look ahead to explore what we've learned, lost, and gained. Join Brandis Friedman and me, Paris Schutz, for Where We Go From Here, a Chicago Tonight special, Thursday at 7 on WTTW and WTTW.com.
Hi, I'm Brian, and you're watching WTTW.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
I feel better today than I have this entire year.
1 year into the pandemic, we talk one-on-one with Governor J.B. Pritzker about the road ahead.
It's the tale of two cities as usual.
Calls for accountability and more community resources after a mass shooting in Greater Grand Crossing over the weekend.
Alden Global Capital's takeover of the Chicago Tribune could be derailed. That and more news from Cranes.
We're missing out on a lot of people's voices and ideas.
How 2 Chicago area institutions are helping people with impaired vision and blindness maintain their independence.
Chicagoans will be having a bit more sunshine in their day thanks to daylight savings time, but how does it affect our sleep?
Someone who thrives in the study of law.
A classical music tribute to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on what would have been her 88th birthday.
91-88, Illinois is the Big Ten tournament champion.
March Madness is here. 2 Illinois teams punched their tickets to the big dance. We have a preview. But first, some of today's top stories. Some more financial assistance to those hit hardest by the COVID shutdowns. State Comptroller Susana Mendoza and Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced the state will stop deducting unpaid fines from tax filers who get the Earned Income Tax Credit. The state normally deducts unpaid traffic, parking, child support, and other unpaid fees.
Today's action is a narrow, targeted approach to provide COVID-19 pandemic relief to low and moderate income working families who need our help now.
Now, this new policy affects as many as 41,000 households in the state and could mean an average boost of $363 per person. And Illinois public health officials announced 782 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 12 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of more than 1,210,000 cases, with 20,955 deaths. The preliminary test positivity rate is 2.6%. The state launches a public hotline for residents to make vaccine appointments. Residents are urged to call 833-621-1284 between 6 a.m. and midnight to get information and to make those appointments. Hotline was launched especially to help residents who have had trouble making appointments online. And now to Amanda Vinicky for a one-on-one with Illinois' governor. Amanda.
Paris, it's been 1 year since Governor J.B. Pritzker took the extraordinary step of issuing an executive order that put a stop to dining at restaurants and bars across Illinois. Just 5 days later, he would announce a stay-at-home order that would last more than 2 months. Since then, more than 1.2 million Illinoisans have contracted the virus, and 20,955 residents have died. Joining us now to reflect on the past year and to discuss what's ahead is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and we thank you so much for being with us, Governor. Since that executive order, restaurants, bars, many small businesses have struggled to stay afloat. Can you give them, Illinoisans, assurances that the worst is behind them?
You know, I feel better today than I have this entire year. As you see, our numbers have significantly declined. The numbers of people going into the hospital, getting sick, going on a ventilator in an ICU ward. And we've got more people vaccinated than on a per capita basis than any other of the top 10 largest states in the country. So we're headed in the right direction, and I think everybody should feel good about that, and their ability to go out to a restaurant and bar now is available to them.
You talked then early on that sacrifice would be needed to save lives. Upon reflection, would you have done anything differently? For example, even should that initial order have been more targeted so that it could have helped small businesses, not favor big box stores?
Well, it's certain that if I knew then what I know now, we might have done some things differently. But as you recall, this novel coronavirus hit us, and we were getting very little guidance from the federal government. The Trump administration was not much help at all, and then became, frankly, a hindrance along the way. We had to really find our own way as a state, and I think we did so as best we could. Certainly my focus all along, my North Star, has been keeping people alive, keeping people healthy, while keeping our economy going.
You know, typically as governor, you would be charged with that solemn duty of attending wakes, funerals, memorials, standing by hospital bedsides, and of course, you're unable to do that due to the nature of this virus. So how have you honored all of those lives lost? Perhaps, I don't know if unfortunately any have been particularly personal to you.
Well, there have been friends of mine that I've lost to this pandemic, and a number that have been sick and recovered, some even with long hauler syndrome. We had two major memorial services in the state, one in Springfield, one in Chicago, to honor those who've passed away as a result of coronavirus. But honestly, I try to honor the people who've passed and those who've gotten sick every day. I look at what I can do to keep them healthy, what I can do to keep people alive across the state every day. I watch the numbers closely, and I try to make adjustments as best I can so that we can keep the state moving forward and protect everybody.
So speaking of making adjustments, there were a lot of guidelines, issuances of restrictions based on cases and such, but let's take a listen to what you had to say the other day when asked about easing some of those current restrictions.
We're making adjustments all the time as things are getting better.
So can you give any specifics as we're in this intermittent period? When are things going to change? We know spectators allowed in baseball stadiums now 20% full, but what else? Businesses tell us they really want certainty, some metrics.
We've been making those adjustments all along here, Amanda. As you know, the 20% attendance at ball games, for example, that's something that we changed in the rules and the mitigations. In addition to that, we've expanded, as you've seen, the number of people who could be in a bar or a restaurant. We also have been in discussions about bringing back certain kinds of conventions, certainly making it safe for people to attend those conventions. And we're talking to businesses constantly about the adjustments that we can make based upon the science, based upon the metrics that we've set out. So I'm looking forward to making even more adjustments as things get better. But I also want everybody to take note that we're not through this pandemic yet. We have to be cautious. There are variants out there. We know that the UK variant is prevalent now in the state of Illinois, and we've got the Brazilian and the South African variants among us. And we just want to be careful, prudent, while looking at opening up the state. But I'm more optimistic now than I have been throughout this pandemic.
Throughout this pandemic, you have issued some 70 executive orders that do allow businesses to say what can and cannot be done for residents as well. The Republican leader of the state Senate has a measure that says no more, if an emergency goes past 30 days, you would no longer have that emergency power. Instead, it would take working with the General Assembly to issue another executive order. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me start with the fact that when we have a flood doesn't decide that it's over after 30 days. Pandemic, as you've seen, doesn't decide that it's over after 30 days. And you're truly dealing with an emergency here. So as we have moved through the year, we've tried to make adjustments. I've consulted with the legislature along the way. They have only met for a few days in 2020 and a few days in 2021. And so, frankly, for the people of Illinois to move forward, they've needed to have somebody to lead and to make sure that we're moving this state forward. And that's what I've done.
One of the other criticisms has been the issue with the state's unemployment agency. We had a viewer contact Chicago tonight saying that it has been 2 months since he filed a claim, still waiting for it to get certified. He's been hung up on, and he no longer has any savings to pay the rent, what have you. What can you tell this individual about his, not just his unemployment status per se, but what is going on with that agency at this very difficult time?
Well, first of all, when people lose their job, it's one of the most devastating things that can happen, and it's extraordinarily important that we're responsive as quickly as we can be to get them the benefits that they deserve. As you know, when this pandemic began, we had 10 times the number of people applying for unemployment benefits as applied during the Great Recession. And I don't think anybody expected that we'd have unemployment higher than the Great Recession.
But we're a year in now.
Yep, and don't forget that for years, for almost 20 years, the number of people, the amount of investment in the Department of Employment Security has gone down. And so when this came a year ago, we immediately acted. We started bringing in more people. We started investing in new technologies. We certainly have a much better system now, and people are being reacted to and called back much faster. To people who are still waiting, I know that there are some unemployment applications that are more challenging than others because of certain circumstances that exist. Don't forget, we also have the federal government adding new programs in. And
so basically you're saying patience to this individual.
What I'm saying is that we're getting back to people as quickly as we can. This is a problem that's hit all over the nation. Literally almost every state in the nation has this sort of a challenge, but we're getting through it, and it's getting much better.
Governor, a lot of folks wanting to get the vaccine, of course. When do you plan to get it? You are eligible after all, and you're the state's governor.
I am eligible, and I've said all along that I don't want to jump the line in front of anybody. And so I want to make sure that most of the people that are eligible in phase 1B+, which is what we're in now, are able to go and get their vaccination, and then I'll go get mine. But I'm staying relatively safe. I'm wearing a mask everywhere I go, following the mitigations. And so I'm hopeful that I'll get vaccinated soon enough.
Why did it take so long for the state to open a hotline? That happened just Friday. There's been repeated frustration and concern over the disparate places to sign up. Why not have a statewide sign up from the onset?
Well, there is a statewide website. That's coronavirus.illinois.gov, and that's allowed people to find where they can get an appointment. And of course, we've had all the local public health departments available by phone for people to call.
But no central sign up to book an
appointment. And
appointment.
Walgreens as well. Right. Well, remember, we have a decentralized public health system in the state of Illinois. And so 97 local public health departments, they don't answer to the state, they answer to their local county governments. And so that's been one of the challenges. So we offered everybody the same software to allow people to get appointments. Many of those local public health departments chose not to use that software. But right now, what we've got is a statewide hotline that people could call to get an appointment. And we've got our website that's also available so they can get an appointment.
You know, Governor, another major change in this past year, of course, the former head of the Democratic Party of Illinois no longer there. What can change for your party now that Speaker Michael Madigan is no more?
Well, I'm very excited about the future of the Democratic Party of Illinois. I think that, we had a historic election where we had two African-American women competing, both of them highly successful elected officials, both of whom are fighting to make sure that the state is represented by Democrats who are fighting for them. I would just point out to everybody that's listening that not a single Republican voted for the American Rescue Plan, President Biden's plan to help the state of Illinois. It was Democrats that led that plan. It was Democrats that voted for that plan. I'm very proud of those Democrats, and I'm going to help to elect all of them come 2022.
And Governor, a final question. That you have extended several times the moratorium on evictions. What is the state planning for when that is over and all of a sudden a whole bunch of rent is going to become due?
Well, I'm very pleased to say that we had one of the biggest rental assistance programs in the entire nation that we put in place last year. And now with the American Rescue Plan, there's even more dollars available for people to pay their rent to their landlords. So I believe that we're going to help people catch up on their rent before we're able to pull the moratorium on evictions down. I'm actually excited about the work that we've done in this state. It's probably better than any other state in the nation at keeping people in their homes.
And wow, a year in, who would have ever thought that we would be at this point? Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about that with us, Governor J.B. Pritzker.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
And this Thursday, we'll have a 1-hour special marking 1 year of COVID-19 shutdowns in Illinois. We'll share insights from public health and government officials, hear from business owners, and shine a light on racial and ethnic disparities brought on by the pandemic. Again, that's this Thursday at 7 here on WTTW. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Amanda, thank you. 15 people were shot and 2 killed early yesterday morning at what police described as a pop-up party in the Park Manor neighborhood. Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor says the business, which operates as a towing company, needs to be held accountable.
We can't have a different set of standards for some communities than others. This would not dare have ever happened in Lincoln Park. Not in a million years. It's not even a thought in my mind. And so why does it get to happen in my community? But we all have to take ownership of what happened and do a better job at actually fixing. And so all I have is my word to these families that if it's legislation, whatever it is, we got to do something different. And it's not giving people a slap on the wrist.
Joining us are Pastor Anthony Wright of Ring of Hope Youth and Family Center and Vondale Singleton of CHAMPS, a mentoring program for young African-American and Latino men. Gentlemen, welcome back to Chicago tonight, and thank you for joining us. Pastor Wright, let's start with you, please. Your organization is just down the street from the site of this shooting. What was your reaction when you first heard that it happened?
Well, thanks again for having me on the show. And I want to start by giving my condolences to those who lost their loved ones in this tragic event. And our thoughts and prayers are with those who are recovering in hospitals. When I first heard, I really couldn't believe it because I heard just bits and pieces of it on the news. So I was really kind of taken aback when I heard it. And some of the information I got may have not been really factual, but the initial thing I heard was that it was gang related. And one of the things I've learned is that oftentimes we label situations gang-related when it's normally an altercation between 1 or 2 people that escalates into violence because of a lack of conflict resolution skills and access to guns. So that was the first thing that came to my mind when I first heard about it.
And Vondale Singleton, kind of on that note, what role does mental health care play in preventing violence and preventing people from becoming desensitized to it?
You know, I think it's everything, and I think we don't do enough of making that cool, making that popular because of the trauma. And so when trauma happens, there needs to be a healing process. That's the normalcy part of trauma, right? But then what happens is while you're in a process to move towards that, something else interrupts that. And so you never get the full development to become whole. And I think it's unfair. I think we have to do more to sound the drum that I'm sure that the shooter had mental health issues. I'm sure he did. Or she.
Yeah, and Pastor Wright, you know, have there been successful long-term violence prevention efforts, or has it always been sort of patchwork in response to something like this?
Well, I think it's been mostly patchwork in my experience. I think we have been reactive instead of proactive. And I really think that we need to really begin to invest in organizations that have boots and roots in our communities. You know, oftentimes when funding is dispersed, it's oftentimes dispersed to people who may not necessarily be rooted in our communities, and the relationship is not there. I really think there needs to be some more sustainable funding and connections with grassroots organizations that already have relationships with the community.
Now, when we spoke with Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, who we heard just a few minutes ago earlier, she also said that it's important for community members to share what they know about the people who are responsible for yesterday's shooting. Here's a bit more from her.
I get people don't trust the police. I get the police haven't been friendly to the community, but the people who ultimately killed and shot these folks need to be held accountable as well. We got to do a better job at not working in silos and actually working together. And so working with community organizations, working with violence prevention, working with the churches, working with the everyday people in the community to say, hey, what could we do different?
And Vondale Singleton, how do you help build that trust, whether it is with police or community members, community leaders?
I think there needs to be some communication around just, you know, how we hold everybody accountable. There's no way that shooters should be hiding within the very communities that they're bringing demise to. I think there needs to be an approach where we as stakeholders say, hey, here we are. We're still being consistent. We're here. And we need everybody to play a part, everybody to play a part. Here's why, because it's a trickle effect when it happens. That trauma spreads to the family, both on the victim side as well as the shooter side. So there are ripple effects that we feel as a result of what happens. And I think if we're going to heal as a community, everybody have to be able to come to the table and have some real, authentic, crucial conversations.
And Pastor Wright, how do you make sure that, you know, community services, whether it's violence prevention or conflict resolution or mental health, that they're actually meeting the needs of the community?
I think that's a great question. I think it all goes back to resources, because we have a lot of great organizations in our community, but the problem has been sustainability. You know, there's only so much you could do without resources. And as I said before, resources are being dispersed, but they're not always, in my opinion, sent to the right places. And back to what Vondale was saying about the community response, you know, we have a lot of people who are really being held hostage in their own communities because of fear. You know, if I speak out, you know, if I don't feel safe, I may be retaliated against. So you have people who want to talk, who want to tell, but they're really being held captive or hostage in their own communities.
And Vondale, how have you seen the pandemic and COVID-19 compound the underlying issues that lead to violence?
Yeah, it's layers upon layers around systemic racism. And as Pastor Wright just mentioned, like, we've been boots on the ground within the community, not just us, but it's been other programs and other leaders within the community. Operation Safe Pump and what they're doing with 3rd District and Sam Binion and Brother Moore and Brother Harris is phenomenal. Every week they're out at the gas stations protecting, you know, and providing safe spaces. So I think, like, as we move forward, again, we have to be able to sit down and communicate about our own issues and also bring solutions that are sustainable. And so part of that is bringing more resources in. Part of that is having listening committees where people of all different ages are sitting down and having these conversations.
Now, both of you have talked about resources. We heard Alderwoman Taylor talk about the community kind of owning it themselves. In the little bit of time that we have left, Vondale, I'm going to ask you first a little bit briefly about CHAMPS and how you all work.
Yeah, absolutely. So CHAMPS stands for Culturally Helping and Making Positive Success. And we are a male mentoring group stemming from Gary Comer College Prep for boys and young men of color. And our 3 E's are education, empowerment, and exposure. And so we are both providing virtual and in-person support. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be teaming up with Pastor Wright and the community South Shore Drill team to clean up the community this Saturday. We're boots on the ground, and we're ready to keep moving forward.
And Pastor Wright, a few seconds left, but Ring of Hope and the work that you do there.
Well, Ring of Hope Youth and Family Services, we started off in the greater Grand Cross community about 10 years ago with a boxing program. And the purpose of the program was to allow young men to channel their energy and aggression in a more positive way. And the program has since evolved into Double Dutch. We have a media lab. We have family wraparound services. We're just trying to, for the most part, prevent violence and try to find alternatives so we can provide a safe community, especially in the greater Grand Crossing community.
Okay. And thanks to both of you for joining us, Pastor Anthony Wright and Vondale Singleton.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Up next, commemorating a legal legend. Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
Today would have been Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's 88th birthday. To commemorate her life and legacy, her son Jim and daughter-in-law, an opera singer and lecturer at Northwestern University Beanan School of Music, launched a tribute. Take a look.
Someone who thrives in the study of law, someone able to read and absorb quickly massive amounts of material.
And joining us now to talk about the life and legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg are her daughter-in-law, Patrice Michaels, who we just saw singing. She also penned some of the 9 songs in the Longview tribute. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg's son, Jim, who runs the Chicago-based classical music label, Cedille Records. Welcome back to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk about RBG with everybody.
Absolutely, and we just heard you singing, Patrice, music that you wrote set to text that she wrote. Tell me how this project came about.
Well, that specific text is actually from an interview that she gave, and I was able to excerpt a really wonderful part where she answered the question, what qualities should a president look for in a Supreme Court justice? And not only did she expound on that, but then she shared some of her personal experience about being on the court for so long and how when up until her 70s, she was able to do anything she wanted. And then gradually she had to make more time to make sure she finished everything. And she would fall asleep and sometimes miss her alarm. So just very endearing personal stories as well as dissenting opinions embedded within the 9 songs.
So 9 songs on this project. Jim, tell us the impetus. Why did you want to create music and song to some text either written by her or associated with her?
Well, it actually dates back to her 80th birthday when my sister and I had the idea as a gift to commission 3 women composers to write songs about her. And one of those composers was Patrice Michaels. And she took her initial song and decided to turn it into a cycle. So really the impetus for the cycle was Patrice's. And then from there, we turned it into an album, including the other 2 songs that were written for the birthday. Yes, the album's called Notorious RBG in Song, as well as other pieces around her, including an aria from the Scalia-Ginsburg operetta.
And let's listen to some more. My Dearest Ruth, that's the track we're going to listen to now. It was the letter Ruth Bader Ginsburg's husband, Marty, wrote days before his death. Take a look.
My dearest Ruth,
So Patrice, you're basically singing a love letter that your father-in-law wrote to your mother-in-law. How difficult is that when it's something so personal and emotional?
This was certainly the most challenging performance to prepare that I have ever been presented with. It took me about 6 months to get to where I could be sure I wouldn't break down. And I want to make sure to let you all know that that song is one of the 3 birthday songs written by wonderful Evanston composer Stacy Garrop.
Birthday song, as we mentioned, it is Justice RBG's 88th birthday today. Jim, how are you celebrating today without her?
Well, we're doing a lot of tributes, very much like this one. Of course, also promoting the video that Patrice created with Northwestern University as a tribute.
And we're launching a campaign for a wonderful philanthropic organization that RBG supported. She gave to SOS Children's Villages, which is an international organization designed to support vulnerable children and youths. Right here in Chicago, we have 2 villages and a new community center opening. So we have a big rollout of the hashtag without RBG and also the hashtag
without Ruth.
Without Ruth, and also the hashtag Trailblazers, because she was one and we need more.
Hashtag. So it sounds like continuing her legacy is a full-time job right now. Jim, obviously a lot of folks miss your mother. Millions of people in this country do. When you reflect on her birthday, what is it that you miss the most?
Oh, she was such a presence in our lives, both as a public figure, and I have to say we enjoyed the last 8 years where she became Notorious RBG. But of course, long before that, she was just my mother, the person who, when I was growing up, made me live up to a certain standard of excellence that has stood me in very good stead throughout my life.
And you mentioned the documentary. In that documentary that produced by Northwestern Law School, you talk a little bit about how she loved opera. If she weren't in the career that she had been in, she would have wanted to be an opera diva. Patrice, you are a wonderful opera singer. How was your mother-in-law as a singer?
You know, she always spoke of herself as a sparrow, not a robin, because she was put into the can't sing category as a child. But I had the great good fortune of sitting next to her during a High Holy Days celebration. And she had a lovely, sweet voice that really matched her lovely, sweet speaking voice. Could not have projected on stage, but that's all right.
Right, it was very soft-spoken. Jim, last question for you. What are the plans for the long view, these 9 songs, once this pandemic has sort of moved on?
Well, this started with the birthday, then the cycle, then the album, and now it's turned into a live stage show, which has many iterations. Has been performed actually with the traveling Notorious RBG exhibit at the various museums it's been at, including when it was at the Illinois Holocaust Museum in Skokie right here. And Patrice has more plans to perform it. In fact, I think there's one coming up very soon.
Yes, June 20th, Father's Day, Highland Park Pilgrim Chamber Players is presenting our quartet version.
All right, combining art and justice, something that you all know your mother probably would have absolutely loved. And our thanks to Jim Ginsburg and Patrice Michaels. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And still to come on Chicago Tonight, a sigh of relief for airlines as new signs point to COVID's loosened grip over the industry. That and more from Cranes. Having trouble adjusting to the spring forward, a professor of sleep medicine joins us to explain how to adjust to daylight savings time. 2 local institutions offer employment and options for independent living to people living with vision impairment and blindness.
Oh, he's going to just launch it. Wow, how about that?
And Illinois and Loyola's men's basketball teams are headed to the big dance this week and could face off in the second round of the tournament. But first, some more of today's top stories. A Chicago police officer is in the hospital tonight after being shot in the South Side's Calumet Heights community. The cop was off duty driving a personal vehicle when 2 suspects allegedly opened fire, according to Chicago police officials. This is the second shooting of a CPD official in as many days. On Sunday, a police sergeant was also shot and later treated for gunshot wounds at a hospital. Illinois public health officials announced 782 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 12 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of more than 1,210,000 cases with 20,955 deaths. The preliminary test positivity rate right now is 2.6%. The late John Prine, a native of west suburban Maywood, won a pair of posthumous Grammy Awards last night. Prine was honored by singer-songwriter Brandi Carlile after one of his last songs, I Remember Everything, won for Best American Roots Song and Best American Roots Performance. Prine died of COVID last year and appeared with me for a conversation on Chicago Tonight back in 2010. You can watch that interview on our website. And now back to Brandis for some of today's top business stories. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. A new suitor could be in the mix to purchase Tribune Publishing, derailing a hedge fund's planned takeover. New signs that COVID-19's grip on the airline industry is weakening, and next-door neighbors of a Grant Park skyscraper project are ripping apart a new plan by the developers. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Welcome back, Ann. So, who is it that's considering this bid on Tribune Publishing, and how might that affect the plans for hedge fund Alden Global Capital to acquire Chicago Tribune?
The potential bidder is a man named Stuart Bynum. He's a Maryland hotel tycoon who has already cut a deal to buy the Baltimore Sun as part of this larger transaction that put Alden Global Capital in a position to buy about 70% of Tribune Publishing that it doesn't already own. So Bynum had already had a plan to basically peel off the Baltimore Sun and go his separate way, but news came over the weekend that he now could be interested in making a bid for the entire company. That would, of course, include the Chicago Tribune. Now, the thing is, he would have to beat Alden Global Capital's bid, which is right now at $630 million. That would be a heavy lift. Certainly, Tribune employees would prefer, I think, to have someone like Bynum as their owner instead of Alden Global Capital, since Alden is pretty famous for cost cutting. One effect of this could be that Alden just ups its bid for Tribune and counters until Bynum can't bid anymore, in which case Alden's cost of acquisition will go up and potentially the cuts could be deeper. So we'll be watching this one.
Yeah, absolutely. One to watch. So Chicago-based United Airlines says that it will stop burning cash. What does this news mean for the airline industry?
Well, it means that actually United has done perhaps a better job than its rivals in positioning itself to weather this COVID storm. Of course, travel demand is up across the industry. We've seen data week in, week out that reflects that. But what United did over the course of the past year to put itself in a good spot now is aggressive cost cutting. They've controlled costs to such an extent that they've been able to basically declare that they're no longer going to be throwing cash into the furnace, as so many other airlines have had to do this past year. Those cuts have included 1,500 corporate HQ jobs, so there's been some pain involved, but they feel like now there's some light at the end of the tunnel.
And lastly, Ann, so developers for the stalled Grant Park skyscraper, they want to add more than 200 units to the project, but some neighbors are upset. What's going on?
Right. We were talking about a skyscraper project called 1000M on South Michigan Avenue. Some neighbors are upset because of that addition of 200 units, but not only that, they're worried very much about the conversion of some of those units from condos to proposed apartments. And I think they argue that this will change the look and feel of the neighborhood and property values for that matter, and in their view, not for the better.
Okay, Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
For some people, adjusting to daylight savings time this past weekend is as simple as changing the time on your oven. For others, it can leave them feeling foggy and tired, and in some extreme cases, it can lead to a spike in car crashes. Joining us now with more is Kristen Knutson, an associate professor of neurology and epidemiology at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Thank you so much for joining us, Kristen. So, according to a poll from AP and the NORC Center, 31% of Americans want daylight savings time year-round. 40% want standard time year-round, and 28% want to switch between the two. Remind us, please, what is the difference between daylight and standard time?
So standard time is the time we experience during the winter. And then, as you know from yesterday, that daylight saving time is when we move our clocks ahead 1 hour. So we lose an hour in daylight saving time.
Yeah, and the easiest way for all of us to remember it, spring forward, fall back.
Yes.
Why is this such a contested issue?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is, you pointed out over 70% of people just want the transitions to stop. And that is really the issue, I think, for a lot of people is this transition. And what's happening is we all have an internal biological clock. And every time we experience a time change, it has to readjust. And this biological clock controls our daily rhythms of mood, of alertness, of performance, our ability to fall asleep, and when we wake up. And so when our internal clock doesn't match the clock on our phones or on our walls, then there's this disruption and our alertness levels are worse. And March is particularly bad because it's associated with advancing the clock, which is for most of us the harder direction to go. And so if you think about it, for me anyway, it's a lot easier to wake up an hour later than it is to wake up an hour earlier. And so at this time, in the springtime change, that means it's an hour of sleep loss too. So you're combining sleep loss with the rhythm problem, and it's a double hit and makes us all struggle a bit over the next few days.
And of course, parents of small children know that it gets harder when you have to figure out adjusting nap time and bedtime for the little people as well.
Exactly. They don't know what your clock says. They don't care. They're going to wake up when their internal clock tells them to.
What benefits do states like Arizona, what benefits do they get from not observing daylight savings time?
Right, so they don't have these transitions, and they don't experience all the negative consequences. As you mentioned, traffic accidents increasing after transitions. We also see increases in stroke, in heart attacks. And so there are some major negative outcomes that seem to spike right after transition. And so people in Arizona and similar areas just don't have to deal with that.
And you just mentioned car crashes. What impact, or talk a little bit more, if you would, about the impact of daylight savings time on public safety and car crashes?
Right. So if your performance or your alertness level is impaired and you're driving a car, you can imagine that your reaction time is going to be slower and therefore more likely to lead to an accident, a certain situation, than it would have a week before when your internal clock was matched to the time of day. So people are getting up an hour earlier, they're tired, they've lost sleep, and they're driving, and they're more likely to get into an accident. And that is sort of what's leading to this increase in accidents, is because our performance and our alertness, we're all impaired a little bit over the next few days.
And you'd say it's more about, our performance being impaired compared to night falling earlier, and therefore we're driving home in the dark, or we're driving more in the dark. I guess the opposite could be said about the morning as well, and it being darker in the morning in the winter during daylight standard time.
And I think that's a lot of why some people do like the change from in the fall and in the spring, because if we stick to permanent daylight saving time, then it's darker in the morning for longer during the winter time, which nobody really seems to like and doesn't want to drive in the dark. And our kids, we don't want them waiting for the bus in the dark. But then the flip in the summertime is, if we do permanent standard time, is we have it gets dark earlier in the day, even though the day is longer. The sun starts to set maybe an hour earlier than we'd like it to in the summertime.
So basically, we're just shifting where that daylight falls.
Exactly.
Could people still be feeling the effects of this switch, even today, a couple of days after the switch happens?
Yeah, I think especially because Sunday we often sleep in because we don't have to get up for work or school usually. So Monday is really the day I think most people start to feel it and start having to try to adjust their clock. And it can take a couple days for the clock to adjust, to make up for the sleep loss. And so I recommend that over the next few days that everybody take it easy on themselves, on people their loved ones, their family, their coworkers, because everybody's struggling a bit over the next few days as they try to readjust and make up for lost sleep.
What does this say about, how fragile our sleep cycles really are?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is a lot of us went into daylight savings time with some sleep debt to begin with. Not everybody gets the recommended 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. And so if you're already a little sleep deprived, this abrupt loss of 1 hour can even have a bigger effect.
What do you recommend for people, first of all, when the time change happens? Like, should we all just plan for a nap on the day of the switch. But then what do you recommend for people who are still maybe feeling the effects a couple of days later?
So I think one of the most important things to do right now is related to light exposure, because light is the key for changing your internal biological clock. Right now, light exposure in the morning is really beneficial to moving your clock earlier. Now, thanks to Chicago and snowy weather, you may have to use artificial light in the morning to get that bright light because there's no sunshine. But it's also really important to avoid bright light in the evening in the hours before bed. And this will include staring at your smartphone or tablet, because light at night is telling your clock to go later. And that's the opposite effect of what we want right now. So bright light in the morning is good, light in the evening is bad for now, and that'll help your clock readjust.
That's pretty classic Chicago weather, too, for the time change. More daylight and wintry mix. Okay, Kristen Knutson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, how technology is helping the visually impaired find employment. But first, a look at the weather.
With 10,000 people turning 65 every day in the U.S., the number of people with visual impairment or blindness is expected to rise significantly in the coming years. But technology is making it possible for people with low or no vision to learn adaptive skills that help them live more independently and find employment. Here's how 2 Chicago area institutions have been working to support the vision-impaired community for over a century. Producer Erica Gunderson has the story.
Chicago is what made me the person I am. This city is what made me independent.
For most Chicagoans, the city's street grid is an everyday convenience. But for Jose Martinez, who was born blind, it's a critical part of maintaining his autonomy.
It's very accessible here. The streets are organized in such a pattern that, it's very easy to learn. And I learned it. I can teach it to another blind person. I feel that confident.
Navigating the city was just one of the many skills Martinez says he's learned at the Chicago Lighthouse. In addition to offering vision care, rehabilitation, job training, and education for people living with vision impairment, the Chicago Lighthouse also employs them in a variety of capacities.
We employ 800 individuals, 30% of whom are mission-related employees, people who are blind, visually impaired, disabled, or veterans.
CEO Janet Slick says the 114-year-old nonprofit was able to navigate itself through the pandemic by pivoting many employees to remote work.
Everything is cloud-based, and so we were able to continue that enterprise. People continued to receive paychecks, and we were able to keep our community working.
Call center supervisor Marcus Johnson says for his team, the move to working from home was bittersweet.
Because even though they're not able to be in the office surrounded, with a lot of people, they're able to work at home in their own comfort zone.
Johnson says other organizations can follow the Lighthouse's lead in employing people with impaired vision.
They're at home, they're not able to work. It kind of feels like that they don't have a voice. So we're missing out on a lot of people's voices and ideas because of some things aren't accessible.
Jose Martinez works at the Lighthouse as part of a team that user tests websites for accessibility.
There were 20 million people with visual impairments in the U.S. As businesses, you want to make sure to reach the largest market possible.
Las Vegas-based chef Regina Mitchell became one of those 20 million when a chronic illness caused her to begin losing her sight in her 50s.
Society is not really accepting or used to a blind person moving about. It's almost as if, what are you doing? Why are you out here? You're struggling. Why don't you just go home?
Mitchell says distance learning classes offered by the Winnetka-based Hadley Institute for the Blind and Visually Impaired helped her to develop adaptive skills so she could keep cooking. Now she runs her own cooking classes for other vision-impaired people. Cases like Mitchell's are expected to be increasingly common, says Hadley CEO Julie Ty.
The incidence of age-related eye disease is going to cause about a doubling of the number of people in this country with visual impairment by the year 2050.
Though the Hadley Institute has been a distance learning organization since it began offering Braille lessons by mail in 1920, Ty says technology has allowed them to broaden their scope to online workshops, podcasts, and webinars that are available free of charge to anyone worldwide.
We have about 500 workshops online, how to cut safely, how to organize your closet, how to dine out comfortably. So very practical help to encourage people to continue to live their lives.
Regina Mitchell urges people learning to live with vision loss to accept that help so that they too can go on to help others.
You will be a model to help the next person on their journey, because someone's going to need you. And that's where I like to feel that the reason I am in this position, so I can help the next person.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
You can find more on the Hadley Institute and the Chicago Lighthouse on our website. Well, get your brackets ready because March Madness is here, and there are two Illinois teams to root for when the NCAA's men's basketball tournament kicks off this week. The University of Illinois Fighting Illini are the #1 seed in the Midwest region after a thrilling overtime win against Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship. And here in Chicago, Loyola is looking for a repeat of its magical Final Four season from 2018, as it has the 8th seed in that region, giving them a potential matchup with U of I in the second round. Joining us to preview the tournament is ESPN college basketball announcer Jordan Burnfield, who handles play-by-play for Loyola Chicago and the University of Illinois at Chicago. Jordan Burnfield, welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, U of I, fresh off that thrilling OT win against Ohio State, Big Ten tourney champions, #1 seed. How does this team match up against the elite teams in the tournament?
Well, Illinois is playing as well as any team in the country, and right now I would say that they might be just the best team in the country. Gonzaga is #1 overall because they're undefeated, so you can't really rate them anything lower than the 1 seed. But Illinois right now, I think many people would say, including myself, is the next best team in the country. They started the season 5-3, but since then they've only lost 3 times and they've won 18 games, including the Big Ten Championship. This team plays stifling defense. They've got an outstanding guard in Ayo Dosunmu, who I believe is one of the best 4 or 5 players in the country. And their center, Kofi Coburn, is so big and strong that he's an incredibly difficult matchup for any team that they play. So right now, the way that they're playing, with the confidence they have coming off that Big Ten championship, I think Illinois is as good as anybody in America.
Certainly on a roll, and some electric players, as you mentioned, Ayo Dosunmu, who are just a joy to watch. And then back here in Chicago, Loyola, they won 16 of 17 games this year. They're led by Cameron Krutwig, who was a freshman on that thrilling 2018 Final Four team. Is this team as good as that team?
I think that they are in different ways. When you look back at the team that went to the Final Four, that team had incredible guard play. They had back-to-back Larry Bird Trophy winners, which means Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Year, in Clayton Custer and Marcus Towns, and those were the 2 starting guards along with Dante Ingram. Through the course of that tournament run, that magical run to the Final Four, all those guys hit game-winning shots to allow them to get to the Final Four. That team also, though, as you mentioned, had Cameron Krutwig. At that time, Krutwig was a freshman. Now Krutwig is a senior. He was the best player in the Missouri Valley Conference this year, won the Larry Bird Trophy. And around him is one of the most talented stables of guards in America. That's why Loyola, out of the Missouri Valley Conference, has been a ranked team for several weeks. That's why they've won 16 of 17. But I'll tell you one more thing. Loyola this year had the best scoring defense in the country. They were only allowing teams about 55 points per game. So if Loyola can get the right matchups, unfortunately, they were underseeded. So they might have to play Illinois in the second round. But if they can get the right matchups, they're a stifling defensive team and one that potentially would be able to go pretty far.
And certainly Loyola's not going to sneak up on anybody this time because of that brilliant run 4 years ago. And you mentioned the same bracket as Illinois. They're going to, if they both win their first round games, they're going to play each other in the second round. Is that kind of a raw deal from the selection committee here to have 2 Illinois teams play each other in the same bracket so early?
Yeah, I feel that it's too early. The reason that they're doing it, for obvious reasons, is that you got the two Illinois schools going up against each other. Remember, this is a TV show, right? This is content, and this could provide a really delicious matchup for the television networks should Loyola beat Georgia Tech and Illinois beat Drexel. But to me, it shouldn't be in the second round. This Loyola team is ranked 17th in the country in the AP poll. They've been in the top 25 for several weeks. They got an 8 seed because I think that the committee undervalued how good Loyola is coming out of the Missouri Valley Conference. So I think it's unfortunate that Loyola got an 8 seed. They really, if you go by the rankings, they should have probably gotten a 5 seed. And if that had happened, then a potential Loyola and Illinois matchup would have happened a lot later in the tournament. I think that would have been more fair. But as it turns out this year, if the two teams have to play, they're going to play in the second round. And I think that while a lot of people are picking Illinois to win the national championship this year, and it would be wonderful for the state and for the city and the so many alumni of Illinois, it would be a little bit bittersweet, right? Because I think many people in the state are rooting for both teams to go as far as possible. But unfortunately, because of the way it was seeded, only one team will get to the second weekend.
Certainly would have been more fun if they met each other in the Final Four, per se, or the national championship game. So how is the tournament working this year? Remind us. It's all in Indiana, or all in the state of Indiana, limited fans. Tell us what happens if there's a COVID outbreak.
Yeah, so it is all in Indianapolis for the later rounds of the tournament, but it's all in Indiana. Some of the games are going to be played at Assembly Hall in Bloomington, where Indiana University is. Some of the early round games are going to be played at Hinkle Fieldhouse at Butler University. Some of the games are going to be at Indiana Farmers Coliseum, which is the home of IUPUI, and some are going to be at Purdue University, in addition to the two major arenas in the city of Indianapolis. So it's going to be all over the state. All the teams are quarantined for the next 7 days. They are being tested every single day. There are 4 replacement teams right now. So if one of the teams tests positive for COVID-19, they would be eliminated from the tournament. The way it works is there are 4 replacement teams that would go for any at-large team that no longer would qualify by virtue of positive tests. Now, if one of the one-bid leagues, like, for instance, the Horizon League were to lose a team, or the MAAC were to lose a team, because those are one-bid leagues, those conferences would be able to select another team to go into their spot from those leagues. So what we have is potentially a few extra teams that could get into the dance.
Certainly incentive for coaches to keep players from leaving those bubbles. All right, Jordan Burnfield, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
And you can read more on this past weekend's big Illini win on our website, as well as more details on the tournament seeding. That's at WTTW.com/news. And that is our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and healthy, and have a good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.